أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. صلى الله على محمد. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us another opportunity to come together and reflect on really one of the most important periods in the early history of Islam. The period from the 36th year after the Hijrah to the Shahada, the martyrdom of Imam al-Mu'mineen in the 40th year after the Hijrah. Now, just to give a recap, for those who weren't in attendance yesterday, we began our discussion by speaking about the widespread discontent towards the government of Uthman. As you know, before the establishment of Imam al-Mu'mineen's government, there were three companions of the Prophet who ruled. And generally speaking, Muslims, there was a revolt against Abu Bakr. During the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, there was a focus on the expansion of the Islamic Empire. And we spoke about some of the dangerous innovations that were introduced during his Khilafah. Innovations, bid'ah, with respect to religious practices. But perhaps the most dangerous and the most damaging innovations were the economic changes. There were changes to the economic policies, whereby, for example, the Muhajirin were given larger stipends than the Ansar. During the reign of Umar ibn al-Khattab, Arabs were given more than non-Arabs. So it created a lot of division in the Muslim community. Wealth became concentrated in certain segments of the society. Certain wives of the Prophet were given larger stipends than others. And then you have Uthman ibn Affan. And what made things very tumultuous during his Khilafah was that he started to appoint his family members and his relatives to government positions. So you have the Khalifa, Uthman ibn Affan, who is a member of Bani Umayyah, appointing members of his clan. So you see that Bani Umayyah during the reign of Uthman ibn Affan essentially becomes the royal family. And they start taking large amounts of money from Baytul Mal. They become incredibly wealthy during this time period. And we mentioned last night that you take one example, the son-in-law of Uthman ibn Affan, the entire Khums of North Africa was given to him. Just one person. The entire Khums of North Africa, he received it. And it became his personal property, part of his personal wealth. So there were many prominent figures in the Ummah who had problems with Uthman. You take, for example, Aisha, one of the wives of the Prophet. She rose against Uthman. She protested against Uthman. Not for religious reasons. The reality is that there were innovations introduced by her father and Umar ibn al-Khattab, but there was no protest. Because she had a privileged status during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and Umar. When Uthman ibn Affan comes to power, he lowers her stipend. So she receives the same amount as other wives. So she takes it personally. And then there's animosity now between her and Uthman. And then you have other figures who felt like they lost their privileged status when Uthman came to power. And therefore we mentioned that there were different uprisings and rebellions that took place throughout the Islamic Empire. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, during this period, he played the role of mediator. He was advising Uthman ibn Affan. And you have to understand that when Amir al-Mu'mineen advises Umar, Uthman or Abu Bakr, you should not interpret his position as an advisor as him giving legitimacy to their government. We have to understand that. The Imam alayhi salam is not lending credence to their rule, but he's playing the role, he's playing the religious role that he has to play, which is Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's the commander of the faithful, whether people recognize him or not. So the Imam alayhi salam played the role of mediator between Uthman and this angry mob, these rebels. And the Imam alayhi salam tried his best to bring the grievances of these rebels to Uthman. But again, Uthman was unwilling to make any changes because he was pressured by his family members. He had a very weak personality when he was dealing with his relatives. So he made no concessions. And then he sends a letter to Muawiyah for help because the uprisings in Kufa, in Egypt, and in Basra were happening away from Medina until a delegation from Egypt arrives, and now there is a rebellion in the city of Medina. So now the problem is in his backyard, as we mentioned. So he seeks the help and support of Muawiyah. Muawiyah is also an Umayyad. He's from the same tribe. So he responds to this call for help by sending an army. But as we mentioned yesterday, Muawiyah also had his own ambitions. Muawiyah wasn't satisfied with just being the governor of Sham. He wanted to ultimately become the Khalifa. And now the only thing between him and the Khilafah is his cousin, Uthman. So he responds to the call. He sends an army, but he tells them to stay at the border of Medina. He says, I'll give you the green light. I'll give you word when you have permission to enter. But he never gives them the green light to enter and actually help Uthman. What happens is the rebels, they see an army, they become provoked. This protest escalates into violence. Water is cut off from Uthman and his family, and then you have an angry mob take the law into their own hands, and they end up assassinating Uthman ibn Affan. Now you can imagine the chaos. The Khalifa of the Muslims, who rules over 50 countries on today's map. The Islamic Empire was massive at that time. 50 countries on today's map. The Khalifa has just been killed. There's a power vacuum now. Chaos. Muawiyah was probably hoping that in the midst of this chaos, he'll take advantage, monopolize, and rise to power. But he underestimated the popularity and the reverence that people had for Ali ibn Abi Talib, because they saw that Amir al-Mu'mineen had a track record of putting the interests of the ummah ahead of his own interests. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was always a sincere advisor. He tried his best to keep the ummah together. And therefore they saw that the Imam alayhi salam was the most qualified to clean up the mess that had happened. And therefore you find that people started to chant the name of Amir al-Mu'mineen. They wanted him to assume the Khilafah. And this is the first time after the death of the Prophet where you have an overwhelming majority wanting one specific leader. So they gather outside of his home and they beg him to become the Khalifa. The Imam alayhi salam, he tells them he's not interested. And the Imam, when he says, Da'uni waltamisu ghayri, leave me and go find someone else. I'll play the same role that I was playing for 25 years. I'll be an advisor to you. But they insisted. The Imam alayhi salam, he says, if you want me to be the Khalifa, you have to understand what you're asking for. You're asking me to sit on the mimbar of the Prophet. And therefore I am going to revive the sunnah of the Prophet. Many of you enjoyed certain privileges that were antithetical to the teachings of Islam. You were taking a larger share from the Islamic treasury than what was your right. So when I come to power, don't think it's just going to be Ali ibn Abi Talib leading Jama'ah prayer. I'm going to come on knock on your doors. Whoever took more than his haqq has to return it to Baytul Mal. It's not easy. Those who made a fortune, you have to give the money back now. Now the Arab and the non-Arab, they receive the same share. Certain wives of the Prophet who were receiving a larger sum of money every month, they're going to go back to the amount that the Holy Prophet designated. Muhajirin, Ansar, all Muslims are equal. So the first thing that the Imam alayhi salam does when he comes to power, as we mentioned, is that he deals with the distribution of Baytul Mal. He equalizes it. Now you can imagine, as I mentioned yesterday, there were a lot of Sahaba, certain wives of the Prophet, who were accustomed to privilege. And Amir al-Mu'mineen is bringing justice now. When you're accustomed to privilege, justice feels like oppression. Right? They feel like we're madloom now. But no, you were a zalim before. You were taking more than your right. Amir al-Mu'mineen is now equalizing the playing field. So then you have certain personalities who rise up against Amir al-Mu'mineen. Namely, unfortunately, one of the wives of the Prophet, Aisha, who, when Uthman was in power, was calling for the murder of Uthman because he took away her privilege. And Aisha had a lot of envy towards Amir al-Mu'mineen. It's the fact. Even non-Muslim historians mention this. There was a lot of jealousy and envy that she had towards Khadija, towards Fatima, towards Ali ibn Abi Talib. So then when Amir al-Mu'mineen becomes the Khalifa, she was hoping that someone else would come to power and restore the privileges that she had during the reign of Abu Bakr and Umar. Now Ali ibn Abi Talib is in power. All of a sudden, she becomes the defender of Uthman. We have to now bring the killers of Uthman to justice. What happened? You're one of the reasons why he was killed. You were motivating people to assault him. Then you have Talha and Zubair, other prominent companions, who pledged allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen because they were also against Uthman. Because Uthman, the Khilafah was like, power was like a pie, and he was only sharing it with members of Bani Umayyah. So those who were not getting a piece of the pie, they wanted to overthrow Uthman. Talha and Zubair were one of them. They had their own ambitions to become Khulafa. Amir al-Mu'mineen rises to power. Now in their minds, especially Zubair was very close with Amir al-Mu'mineen. After the death of the Prophet, Zubair was one of the supporters of Amir al-Mu'mineen. After the death of the Prophet, Zubair was one of the four who says to Ali that I'm willing to fight against the Khalifa. to regain your right. He was one of the first ones to pledge allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen. But you know, there are certain people, you know, in their minds, pledging allegiance to Ali was a favor. When Ali ibn Abi Talib becomes the Khalifa, he has to also return the favor. By doing what? They had certain expectations that Ali is going to make us governors in his government. He's going to give us the governorship of Yemen, of Basra. But they underestimated the justice of Ali ibn Abi Talib. They would come asking the Imam to appoint them, to give them positions. On one occasion, Amir al-Mu'mineen is counting money in the Islamic treasury, in Baytul Mal. They come to visit him. It was nighttime. The Imam had a candle. We know the story. They come. As soon as they walk in, the Imam says, "Are you here for a personal issue, or are you here to discuss an issue that concerns the Ummah? Is this a public issue or a private matter?" They say, "No, we have some personal business to discuss with you." Amir al-Mu'mineen blows out the candle. And then he lights another candle. They were puzzled. They say, "What? It's the same. You extinguished one candle and lit another candle. What's the candle? Why did you do that?" The Imam says, "The first candle was purchased with the wealth of Muslims. I don't want a single drop of wax to be used for a personal meeting. The second candle is mine. The second candle is mine. So let that wax drip." When they saw that this is the mindset of Ali ibn Abi Talib, they know this guy's not going to give us anything. So what did they do? They break their allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen, and all of a sudden they start to use the excuse of, "We have to bring the killers of Uthman to justice." They form an alliance with Aisha, and Muawiyah is in the background as the hidden enemy, instigating. Because Muawiyah's worst nightmare is that Ali ibn Abi Talib is the Khalifa. So he starts to make promises that if you rise up, if you make a big issue of Uthman's death, if you oppose Ali, I'll support you. I'll fund you. I'll send you, you know, reinforcements. I'll support you with my military power. And then the Battle of Jamal takes place, and we spoke about that in detail. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam ruled for 4 years. In those 4 years, he fights 3 battles. 3 battles. Was it non-Muslims? Were non-Muslims fighting the Imam? Was it Zoroastrians, Jews, Christians? The Muslims themselves. They were fighting Ali ibn Abi Talib. Instead of spreading the beauty of Islam to the far corners of the earth, they were fighting Ali ibn Abi Talib for dunya. So after the Battle of Jamal, and we mentioned that this was a devastating battle for the Muslims, because this is the first time in the history of Islam that Muslim is fighting against Muslim. You know, now you know, we're used to it. Muslim killing Muslim, it's like every day we hear it on the news. But at this time, this is the first time in history that a Muslim is shedding the blood of another Muslim. 20,000 casualties from the army of Aisha. They lost their lives for what? Many of them were naive. They thought, it's the wife of the Prophet. I'm supporting her, and therefore I'm supporting Rasulullah. They thought that this was like a religious cause. But they gave their lives for the dunya of others. And this was the tragedy. Amir al-Mu'mineen, do you think it was easy for him to walk on the battlefield and see all of these people who were victims of propaganda, who lost their lives, families ruined, because certain people wanted more money. They wanted more dunya. The Imam alayhi salam, after the Battle of Jamal took place in Basra, and you know, 20,000 people, you're talking about a lot of death. Can you imagine how long it takes to bury 20,000 people? dealing with the orphans and the widows. Amir al-Mu'mineen remains in Basra for about 2 months, just doing damage control, restoring that community. And the Imam alayhi salam condemns the people in Basra who supported Aisha, Talha and Zubair and others. The Imam alayhi salam remains in Basra, as I said, for 2 months, and he starts to lecture, to teach the people, because many of them were ignorant. Amir al-Mu'mineen used to lecture at Masjid al-Basra, and on one occasion, Dua Kumail, that we recite every Thursday night, Dua Kumail was given to Kumail ibn Ziyad in Basra after the Battle of Jamal. So Amir al-Mu'mineen is given a sermon, and he mentions in passing the dua of Khidr, the teacher of Musa in the Quran. He mentions that he has a dua. The only person who bothered to ask the Imam, what is the dua of Khidr? Teach me. Sometimes we listen to lectures, but we don't think critically about what's being said. We're just passive listeners. Kumail ibn Ziyad goes to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was thinking, what is this dua of Khidr? He goes to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen where he was staying in Basra. In the middle of the night, he knocks on his door. The Imam says, is everything okay, O Kumail? He says, what brings you to my house this late at night? Kumail says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, the dua of Khidr that you mentioned. I wanted to know, what was this dua that you mentioned? Does Amir al-Mu'mineen shut the door and say, come back in the morning? I have to sleep? The Imam appreciates people who want to elevate their spirituality. He says, come, sit down, and I'm going to teach you this dua. And this dua becomes Dua Kumail. It's named after the man who asked about it. See the barakah of asking questions? One man was curious. He wanted to learn. He wanted to get closer to Allah. Imam teaches him the dua of Khidr, and the dua becomes named after the one who was asking about it. Dua Kumail, it was taught to Kumail ibn Ziyad in Basra. Now, after the Battle of Jamal, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the capital of his government is Medina at the time. After the Battle of Jamal, he relocates. He changes the capital to Kufa. The Imam alayhi salam changes the capital to Kufa. Now, why does he do this? Now, the reason why the Imam alayhi salam does this is because, number one, the Imam had a lot of supporters in Kufa. We often have this impression that Kufa, a bunch of hypocrites, they betray the Imams. This is not entirely accurate. There were good people in Kufa and there were hypocrites in Kufa. Many of the Imam's supporters came from Kufa. So it's unfair to paint the people of Kufa with one brush. They're all munafiqeen, they're disloyal. The Imam alayhi salam moves his capital to the city of Kufa because there were many pious people there. He had many supporters there. He had many people there who were going to help him achieve his objectives. And this is also a lesson for us, brothers and sisters. Sometimes we have to move to places that are going to facilitate our journey to Allah. A lot of times when people move to cities, they buy a house in the middle of nowhere. They don't bother to ask, is there a masjid in the area? Maybe I should buy a house that's close to the masjid. You buy a house in the middle of nowhere, and then you wonder why when your kids become teenagers, they don't have any deen. Because you didn't think about the environment. You didn't think about being in a place that's going to allow me to grow. We only think about, is this a good school district? Now, these are important issues. But you also have to keep in mind that you need to reside in a community that's going to help you grow spiritually. Amir al-Mu'mineen moves the capital from Medina to Kufa because he has more support in Kufa. There's a strong support system. Now, the Imam alayhi salam, if you notice, as I mentioned, in Nahjul Balagha, the sermons that you read in Nahjul Balagha were sermons that were delivered during the Imam's Khilafah. So during those 4 years, these are excerpts of sermons that the Imam delivered. If you read Nahjul Balagha, you'll notice many of the Imam's sermons focus on the danger of being attached to dunya. It's a common theme in Nahjul Balagha. Amir al-Mu'mineen warns people of indulging too much in materialism. Why does the Imam do this? If you look at the early history of Islam, the trial of the first Muslims was the trial of poverty. Many of the early Muslims were poor. If you look at Rasulullah in Mecca, many of them had nothing. They migrated from Mecca to Medina. Poverty. Poverty was the test. The majority of Muslims were poor. After Umar ibn al-Khattab, you have expansion. They're conquering new lands. There's a huge influx of wealth. The standard of living has now gone up. People are a lot wealthier. That's why the sermons in Nahjul Balagha about dunya are very relevant to the second generation Muslims in the West. Because when our parents came to the US, they were refugees. They were migrants. They were barely making ends meet. Their test was the test of poverty. But you and I were a lot more comfortable. There's a lot more affluence. So our trial is what? The trial of wealth. Most of the second generation Muslims, doctors, lawyers, they have good income. They live in upscale neighborhoods. The trial has now shifted. It's still a trial. Don't think that the faqir is the only one who's being tested. Many of us, we think that if Allah wants to test me, my bank account has to be empty. No, Allah is testing you when you have wealth and when you have nothing. So the Imam alayhi salam spends a lot of time teaching the people that you can live in the dunya, you can live in this life, you can enjoy it, but don't get obsessed. Don't get too attached. Don't become obsessed. Don't make dunya your direction in life. Don't make all of the decisions you make revolve around what's going to make me more comfortable in this life. Brothers and sisters, there are two types of religious communities. There are certain communities whose direction and goal in life is affluence. Meaning, they measure success from a materialistic perspective. You're successful if you have a 6-figure income. You're successful if you drive a Tesla. You're successful, if you have a good retirement account, if you live in a good neighborhood. And what does religion become? Religion becomes a way to minimize my guilt for indulging in dunya. That's what it becomes. I go out on my vacations, I wear my brand name clothes, this and that, and I come to the masjid on Friday just so I feel like I'm doing something. It makes me feel less guilty. When we want to give guidance to our children on what career path to choose, what do? We push them to choose careers that are going to earn them the highest income. It's not about what's going to be best for Islam. What are you passionate about? Put Islam on the side. We have many families, they have children, teenagers, they're preparing to go to college. You have 3 options in life: doctor, What's the second? Engineer or a loser, right? There's no third one. Or you're a loser. So what makes these people religious? They talk about it. There's nothing religious about our lives. You go to our houses, our household is the same as a non-Muslim household. Same language, we do the same things. You know, a lot of Muslims, especially in the West, you know, when we engage in interfaith dialogue, we say, oh, we're just like everybody else. We're just like everybody. That's the problem. You're just like everybody else. What's the point of being Muslim if you're just like everybody else? There has to be something unique about you. So for these people, this type of religious community, religion is just talk. As Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, وَالدِّينُ لَعِقٌ عَلَىٰ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. We have these double lives where we pursue nothing but materialism at home, and then when we come to the mosque, you know, we talk about what the Imam did, what the Prophet said, but it's just talk. There's no real change in our lives. We have the same behaviors. So this is one religious community. And then you have, you know, and this is exactly what Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam mentions. You know, النَّاسُ عَبِيدُ الدُّنْيَا. People are slaves of this material life. وَالدِّينُ لَعِقٌ عَلَىٰ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. And religion is just something that's on their tongues, something that they talk about. يَحُوطُونَهُمَا دَرَّتْ مَعَيْشَهُمْ. That they'll talk about religion as long as it doesn't affect their livelihood. As long as I have my money, my job is safe, as long as I'm not inconvenienced in any way, religion is great. And then what does the Imam say? You know, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, every year we come together and we commemorate his martyr. This is the Imam saying this. فَإِذَا مُحِّصُوا بِالْبَلَاءِ قَلَّ الدَّيَّانُونَ. But these same people who are always talking about religion, they're always talking about faith, always mentioning stories of the prophets and the Imams, when Allah tries them, when they go through some difficulties, when they have to give up some dunya, the people of true faith are very few. During the time of Imam al-Hussein, hundreds of thousands of Muslims, maybe over 1 million, 72 came with him. The others weren't praying, they weren't fasting, they weren't reciting the Quran, but they were that first type, where religion is just talk. As long as I'm not in danger, as long as I get to keep my money, as long as I get to do what I want, we compartmentalize religion, right? It's just something that I do on the side. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he's delivering these sermons in Basra and Kufa, he's trying to tell these people that Allah should be your direction. He should be the focal point. Every decision that you make should be to draw you closer to Him. Because at the end of the day, whether you're poor or you're rich, we're all going to go, you know, the grave is the same size for everybody. You all wear the same kafan. So the Imam alayhi salam wants these people to make their direction in life Allah. As Ibrahim says in the Quran, Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin. Everything that I do, every movement is for Him, to get closer to Him, because He's the source of happiness. You're not going to find happiness anywhere else. You might be temporarily happy. You know Anthony Bourdain, you guys all know him. You know, if you put his life on paper, you should be the happiest guy. Traveling around the world, great job, meeting people from different cultural backgrounds. He has the money, the fame. On paper, he should be happy. What happened? People feel empty. There's this emptiness. You know why? Because we're trying to fill our hearts with everything other than Allah. It's the reality. You know what? You know your gas tank in your car? If you fill it up with water, you know, don't do this. I don't want you to do any experiments today. If you fill the gas tank with water, what's going to happen? It's not going to work. The car won't start. Why won't it start? Because you filled it with something that didn't belong there. The gas tank is designed to carry what? Gasoline. Your heart is designed to carry Allah. If you fill it with anything else, it breaks. It's the nature of the heart. Now, so after the Battle of Jamal, the Imam moves his capital from Medina to Kufa. He starts delivering sermons. He sees that people have become very materialistic. There's no spirituality. Prayer, they've just become rituals. There's no spirit. So the Imam alayhi salam, he defeats his enemies in the Battle of Jamal, but he still has the biggest enemy in Sham, in Muawiyah, because the Battle of Jamal was really a proxy war. You know, Muawiyah was the one who was pulling the strings. Now, before I speak about the Battle of Siffin, which is the second battle during the Imam's Khilafah, we have to understand who this person is, who Muawiyah is. What's his background? Muawiyah, his father, as many of you know, is Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan was the arch enemy of the Prophet. You know, it's amazing that, 50 years after the death of the Prophet, the ones who were his arch enemies become the khulafa who represent him. I'll give you an example just for you to appreciate the insanity of that. That's like after the death of, George Bush, Osama bin Laden becomes the president. That's how insane that is. That the arch enemy of the Prophet, his children become the heads of state, representing Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Muhammad wa Abu Sufyan and his son Muawiyah. When did Abu Sufyan become Muslim? When did he become Muslim? In the conquest of Mecca. When the Prophet conquered Mecca. Not when the Prophet was being persecuted, not after Badr or Uhud. Abu Sufyan was spearheading all of these battles. When the Prophet enters Mecca with 10,000 soldiers, the Prophet is now a force to be dealt with. They conquer Mecca. Abu Sufyan now is powerless. He can't fight back. He can't do anything. Islam has become too powerful to face in the battlefield. So they bring Abu Sufyan to the Prophet. Rasulullah pardons him. He releases them. They're called the Tulaqa, those who were granted amnesty by the Prophet. They bring Abu Sufyan to the Prophet. Abu Sufyan is sitting right in front of the Prophet. Rasulullah tells him, Ya Aba Sufyan, Ama ana laka an tashhad an la ilaha illallah. Isn't it time for you to admit that there is no God but Allah? That He is the all-knowing, the all-powerful. Isn't it time for you to acknowledge this reality, that there is no God but Allah? He says, yes. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. But to become Muslim, you also have to say something else, yes? You're halfway there. Rasulullah tells him, Ama ana laka an tashhada anni Rasulullah. Isn't it time for you to bear witness that I am the messenger of Allah? Abu Sufyan says, Amma hadhi fa inna fil qalbi minha shay. He says, this last one, my heart doesn't allow me to say it. Can you imagine? The way he becomes, he can't even say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. The envy, the jealousy, the animosity he had for the Prophet. Because Abu Sufyan and Bani Umayyah, they were ruling Arabia in Jahiliyyah. Now this man comes to power, and we are his subjects and he's the ruler. This is the household that Muawiyah grew up in. You think when Abu Sufyan goes home and you think he's saying how much he loves the Prophet? He hated the Prophet. This is the household that Muawiyah grew up in. So Abu Sufyan, Muawiyah, they surrender to Islam. You know, they publicly become Muslims, right? After they have no other way of fighting the Prophet, they surrender, they become Muslims. When Uthman comes to power, Abu Sufyan was blind. You know, I'm going to go back in history a little bit just so you can understand who this Muawiyah is. Abu Sufyan, when Uthman comes to power, and this was the dream of the Umayyads, because Uthman is one of them. Uthman coming to power it's like Eid for them. Abu Sufyan comes to visit Uthman. He comes to his palace and he asks, he's blind. He says, is it only family? They say, yes, it's just us. So he calls upon all of the Umayyads. He says, come, you know, he's the elder of the family. He says, تَلَقَّفُوهَا يَا بَنِي عَبْدَ شَمْسِ. He says, all my children, all my family, take advantage of it, meaning the Khilafah, and pass it amongst you like a ball. You know, children, when they play with a soccer ball, they kick it to each other. He says, do that, because I swear there is no hellfire and there is no paradise. There's no wahy, there's nothing. He goes to the grave of Hamza. Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet who was killed in Uhud. Abu Sufyan goes to the grave of Hamza when Uthman becomes the Khalifa, and he kicks the grave of Hamza, saying that, you know, we were fighting each other and it came back to us. Power came back to us. What were we fighting over? I won. We are now in power. You gave your life for nothing. When Abu Sufyan surrendered to Islam, the Prophet was very wise in the way that he dealt with the Umayyads. Because again, these were the rulers during the time of Jahiliyyah. The Prophet used to give them money from Baytul Mal to soften their hearts, to make them, you know, more inclined towards Islam. The Holy Prophet even appoints Abu Sufyan to be a tax collector. Rasulullah really tried to make them feel like stakeholders within the Islamic State. He wanted to soften their hearts. When the Prophet was on his deathbed, Abu Sufyan was sent to collect zakat. The Prophet dies in Medina. Abu Sufyan comes back and sees that Abu Bakr is the Khalifa. And Abu Sufyan was shocked. Do you know why he was shocked? You know, a lot of Muslims, they don't know this, but Abu Bakr doesn't come from a prestigious tribe. Abu Sufyan comes from a prestigious tribe. So he was shocked that how could someone who comes from, you know, a tribe that's not very prominent become the Khalifa? So what does Abu Bakr do? He goes to Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says that we should rise up. Oh, now he wants to work with Ali ibn Abi Talib. You see, the enemies of Islam, what do they want to do? They want to pit Muslims against each other. It's their policy throughout history. You know, in the 1980s, you know, certain Western powers pit what? Iran and Iraq against each other. 8 years of war. This is their dream, for Muslims to fight each other. That's why we have to always promote unity. When you fight each other, when you slander each other, when you attack each other, when you tear each other down, you're doing the enemy's work for them. So the Imam alayhi salam, he declines any help from Abu Sufyan. Now, as I mentioned, Abu Bakr rules. When Abu Bakr comes to power, he appoints Yazid, the son of Abu Sufyan, the brother of Muawiyah, as the governor of Sham. After him, Umar ibn al-Khattab appoints Muawiyah, because they know that if we don't give Bani Umayyah anything, they're going to create a mutiny. We have to give them something just to keep them quiet. And Amir al-Mu'mineen warned Umar ibn al-Khattab that don't appoint Muawiyah. don't appoint this guy. But he didn't listen to the Imam. Amir al-Mu'mineen comes to power. It's the battle of Jamal takes place. Muawiyah refuses to step down. He refuses to step down, and people tell Amir al-Mu'mineen that now that you've become the Khalifa, just leave Muawiyah alone. Consolidate your power. Let him stay in power. The Imam says no. Why does the Imam not want to keep Muawiyah in power for a single day? Is it just because Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen is just? You know, the Imam alayhi salam, for example, Ziyad ibn Abi, you know, Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, you know, we know his name in Karbala. He was the governor of Kufa. His father, the Imam alayhi salam, appointed him as a government employee. He wasn't a religious person, but the Imam alayhi salam, he had a crisis when he came to power. There were not enough religious people who had management skills. You know, just because someone prays and fasts doesn't mean that they can run a government. Doesn't mean that they're going to be good employees. So the Imam alayhi salam, oftentimes he had to compromise. So this is a person that's not necessarily religious. You know, there might be problems with his prayer. He might commit certain sins, but I can rely on him. He has the skill set to perform this specific job. So the Imam appointed Ziyad ibn Abi as an employee. But Muawiyah, what was the problem with Muawiyah? He's not religious and he doesn't listen. Ziyad ibn Abi, these other individuals who weren't necessarily religious, but at least they listened to the Imam. The Imam gives them a task, they fulfill it. They felt happy that they had a position. The Imam could rely on them to do their job. But Muawiyah, his thirst for power cannot be satiated with, you know, being the governor. The Imam wants the whole, Muawiyah wants the whole thing. He's not going to be satisfied with simply being the governor of Sham. He doesn't want to be ruled. He wants to be the ruler. So the Imam alayhi salam essentially deposes him. Now, Muawiyah, if you look at Nahj al-Balagha, there are many letters that are exchanged by Amir al-Mu'mineen and Muawiyah. And the Imam alayhi salam makes numerous attempts to remove him from power, asking him to step down. The Imam doesn't want a military conflict. There are enough problems within the Ummah than to have another civil war. The Imam is asking Muawiyah to step down. Muawiyah, what does he say? He responds in a letter to the Imam. He basically ignores everything that the Imam is saying. It says, I want you to hand over the killers of Uthman. Hand over the killers of Uthman. The Imam alayhi salam tells him that this is not a reason for you to refuse allegiance. This is a government. If you have an issue, we have a judicial system. There's a process. But he refuses. And they continue to correspond. And what is Muawiyah doing now? Letters are being sent back and forth. Muawiyah tries to provoke Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, for example, in one letter that, oh, you're just, you know, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman were better than you. They were superior. You were jealous of them. What is he trying to do? Muawiyah is trying to get the Imam to say something negative about Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman. Why? So he can use it and say, oh, look, Ali is cursing these Sahaba, he's an enemy. He's trying to tarnish. He's trying to throw the bait for Ali ibn Abi Talib. The Imam knows that these are figures that are respected. If I attack them, if I say anything about them, it's going to create a lot of problems. He doesn't fall for the trap. Meanwhile, these letters are going back and forth. Muawiyah is assembling an army. In the meantime, he's able to enlist 75,000 people to fight. To fight Ali ibn Abi Talib. To capture the Khilafah. The Imam alayhi salam knows that an army is being formed. He recruits 45,000. Can you imagine? You're the Khalifa. 30,000 less. The Battle of Siffin takes place. The Imam travels to the northern part of Iraq, the southern part of Syria. And the Battle of Siffin takes place. Now the Battle of Jamal lasted for how many days? 3 days. The Battle of Siffin lasted for months. For months. Now, you know, at that time, when you go to war, you know, you don't get on United Airlines and you fly and then you come back a few weeks later. You're talking about being away from your family for 6 months, maybe even a year. It takes a lot of, it's very taxing mentally, physically. So the Imam alayhi salam arrives. The two armies face each other, and the Imam alayhi salam has the best fighters. He has the likes of Malik al-Ashtar, Imam al-Hassan, Imam al-Hussein are there. Other prominent individuals are there, Ammar ibn Yasir. The battle begins. Now, of course, the Imam alayhi salam doesn't initiate the battle. He tries, as he always does, to resolve things diplomatically, to find a peaceful solution. But the battle takes place, and Malik al-Ashtar is one of the commanders. You know, Malik al-Ashtar was very close to Amir al-Mu'mineen. You know, he was a very skilled warrior, and he was also a very religious person, a very spiritual person. To such an extent that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, when he speaks about Malik al-Ashtar, he says, كَانَ لِي كَمَا كُنْتُ لِرَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ. That he was as close to me as I was close to the Prophet. They were like this, very close to each other. So Malik is destroying the enemies. He's fighting, and then Amr ibn al-As and Muawiyah, they realize that they're going to lose this battle. Now Amr ibn al-As is also an interesting character in the history of Islam. He's a very shrewd politician. They devise a way to bring the victory of Ali ibn Abi Talib to a halt. They wanted to stop him from achieving victory. Amr ibn al-As proposes the following to Muawiyah. He says to him that let us raise the Quran on the spears. You know, initially Muawiyah thought this is a silly idea. What is that going to do? Amr ibn al-As says, let us put the Quran on the spears and call for arbitration. Let the Quran be the judge. Amr ibn al-As explains that when we do this, there are 3 groups that are going to emerge in the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib. The first are people that are not going to be affected. They're going to know that this is a trick. How about the other 2 groups? Others will be fooled. They'll say, they're calling us to the Quran, we have to stop. A third of them will be naive. No, they're raising the Quran, we have to stop. They're calling us to the Quran. And then a third of them will be confused. We don't need to convince all of them. If we can just plant the seeds of doubt, if we can make them confused, we will cripple 2/3 of his army. Some will want to stop, others will be confused. Should we continue fighting? Should we stop? They do this. They put as the Imam is about to gain victory, they raise the Quran on the spears. And what Amr ibn al-As predicted happened. Amir al-Mu'mineen is telling them, don't be fooled, continue to fight. I am the living Quran. Who cares about what they're putting on the spears? Others said, no, they're calling us to the Quran. Out of respect for the Quran, we have to stop. Others are confused. You know, Muawiyah, you know, before the battle began, he had already bribed people in Amir al-Mu'mineen's army that if you can create confusion, if you submit to the judgment of the Quran, I promise you land. You know, for example, an individual by the name of Ash'ath ibn Qais al-Kindi, he was bribed by, he was in the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib, bribed by Muawiyah. You know, this man, Ash'ath ibn Qais al-Kindi, do you know, this is the same guy that encourages Ibn Muljim to assassinate Ali ibn Abi Talib years later. This is the same guy whose daughter marries Imam al-Hassan and poisons him. This is the same guy whose son, Muhammad ibn al-Ash'ath, was one of the ones who fought Imam al-Hussein in Karbala. What a family, right? So they raise the Quran on the spears. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, don't be fooled. Muawiyah is calling you to the Quran. I grew up with Bani Umayyah. I know what these people are like. They're not religious. They were the ones who fought the Prophet. They're calling you to the Quran. I was calling them to the Quran before the battle began. There was a mutiny in the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib. This is where the Khawarij, you know, form. The Khawarij came from the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib. They said, we have to stop. Send a message to Malik, who was at the front lines, that he has to stop. The Imam says, it's been months, just give me 1 more hour, we'll finish Muawiyah. They force the Imam. Imagine, they draw their swords on Ali ibn Abi Talib. These are men who are fighting alongside the Imam. They're pressuring the Imam to bring the battle to a halt. They're threatening to kill Ali ibn Abi Talib. The Imam sends word to Malik that, come back. Malik says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I need 1 more hour and we'll defeat Muawiyah. 1 more hour, that's it. The Imam sends him a message. If you want to see your Imam alive, you have to come back now. They drew their swords. They were calling him Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now they're just calling him Ali. The battle comes to a halt. Now they want to come and have an arbitration. The camp of Muawiyah appoints someone. They appoint Amr ibn al-As, the architect. Amir al-Mu'mineen wants to appoint someone to represent him in the discussions. He wants to appoint Malik al-Ashtar. These individuals, these Khawarij, they say, no, it's not up to you. We want to choose someone. The Imam says, Abdullah ibn Abbas, he's my second recommendation. They don't listen. They appoint Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. One of the, you know, if I want to be polite, a very simple-minded person. So, Amr ibn al-As, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, they come together. The Quran is going to be the judge between us. They go and they have a closed meeting. Amr ibn al-As is wise. He's very sharp. He says to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari that, look at what happened when Ali ibn Abi Talib became the Khalifa. It's been nothing but war, bloodshed. And it seems that the Ummah doesn't want Muawiyah or Ali ibn Abi Talib. So we should announce that both of them are resigning. That Ali is resigning as Khalifa and Muawiyah is also stepping down. Let us unite the Ummah. So let's make the announcement that we will have a new election and elect a new Khalifa. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari says, wonderful idea. So let's make the announcement. Who should go first? Amr ibn al-As says, you're my elder, you're a companion of the Prophet. Bismillah, go first. Make the announcement. Make the announcement that Ali is resigning as Khalifa. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari goes and he says, oh people, me as the representative of Ali ibn Abi Talib in this arbitration, we have come to this decision that Ali is stepping down. I declare that Ali has resigned as the Khalifa. And also Muawiyah is also stepping down. Amr al-As says, you speak for Ali, I'll speak for Muawiyah. Amr ibn al-As stands up. He says, we accept the resignation of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and I declare that Muawiyah is the Khalifa. They start fighting, pushing, shoving, screaming, yelling. The battle comes to an end. The army of Muawiyah goes back to Sham. The army of Ali ibn Abi Talib returns to Kufa. But about a few thousand of them, known as the Khawarij, they don't join Ali ibn Abi Talib. When the arbitration was happening, the Khawarij says, no, let's fight. Let's continue fighting. The Imam says, too late. We already signed an agreement that we're going to have this arbitration. And then they call Ali ibn Abi Talib a kafir, that you committed a sin by agreeing to the arbitration. You guys pressured me. You see the types of people that the Imam was dealing with? Ignorant people who are trying to teach him Islam. The Imam alayhi salam, he goes back to Kufa. These individuals, they settle in Nukhayla. They stay at the outskirts of Kufa, and they refuse to join the Imam. Now, why were the companions so eager to accept this arbitration in the Battle of Siffin? As I mentioned, the battle lasted for months. Many of them were just looking for an excuse to just put an end to things. They just wanted to get back to their families. So they were very willing to just agree to anything just so they can go back home. Now, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, la basallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Do we still have more time? Okay. So, the Khawarij, they're the new problem in the government of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So these are the radicals, the individuals who consider Ali ibn Abi Talib to be a kafir. They have the slogan, La hukma illa lillah. Rulership belongs only to God. We don't accept Muawiyah and we don't accept Ali. They considered both of them heretics and infidels. So this group formed in the Battle of Siffin. Originally they were with Amir al-Mu'mineen, but then they defected. They're known as the Khawarij. And interestingly, the one who ends up killing Ali ibn Abi Talib is one of the Khawarij. Ibn Muljim is a Khariji. Now these are individuals that believe that if you commit a sin and you don't do tawbah, you're kafir. So they apply the label of kafir very loosely. They have the same ideology as like ISIS. I remember when I was younger, you used to read about Khawarij and their violence and their radical nature, and it was hard to imagine that there were actually people like that. But subhanAllah, we see, the ideological children of these people. ISIS, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, same mentality, radicals. Everyone, if you don't agree with my version of Islam, you're kafir, who deserves to be killed. You're an apostate. So the Khawarij, they settle in Nahrawan, which becomes later on the third battle during the government of the Imam. So the Imam fought 3 battles: Jamal, Siffin, and now Nahrawan is going to be an issue. There are now 4,000 individuals settled outside of Kufa and Nahrawan who believe that Ali ibn Abi Talib is a kafir. Now, what do these individuals do? And what makes them dangerous? What makes them dangerous is that they appear to be religious. They do the most damage. You know, Muawiyah, you know, he was a very materialistic person. You know, he didn't really play. He was religious, but not to that. He wasn't as zealot like these individuals. Many of these Khawarij, they were Qurra. They were reciters of the Quran. Many of them had the Quran memorized. Many of them had marks of sajda on their foreheads. You know, the ahadith speak about these types of people, that if you were to see them pray, you would belittle your own prayer. They fast more than you. While you're sleeping, they're praying. That's why Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, la basallu ala Muhammad wa ala. You know, when he was asked about, you know, the sign of true piety, you know, what's the real indicator of piety, of taqwa? The Imam says, لا تنظر إلى طول ركوع الرجل وسجوده. The Imam says, don't look at how long someone does ruku' and sujood, because prayer may be a habit. You know, sometimes you get into the habit of doing things. It might be a habit that if they don't pray, they feel like something is wrong, something is missing. Salah, this ritual worship, has become a habit. You know, some people have a habit of going to the gym. They feel restless if they don't go to the gym. These people feel restless if they don't pray because it's a habit. The Imam says, don't look at the length of time people bow and prostrate, because this might be a habit for them. So what is the indicator of piety? ولكن انظر إلى صدق الحديث وأداء الأمانة. The true indicator of piety is to be honest, truthful. How many Muslims pray? Millions upon millions, tens of millions. They pray. They don't miss a prayer. But how many out of the 1.5 billion Muslims never lie? How many of them never lie? You know, when I fill out my taxes, I lie. Oh, because they're kuffar, I can lie to them. I can cheat. How many of us don't ever lie? Rasulullah in Mecca, he was as-sadiq al-amin, the honest, the trustworthy. Was he dealing with mu'mineen? Kuffar. That's how he used to deal with kuffar. He was known as the trustworthy one. The Imam says this is the real indicator of piety: truthfulness, honesty, being trustworthy. So these individuals, the Khawarij, they were fulfilling all of the rituals. And believe me, these are the types of people that do the most damage to Islam. These are the types of people that end up killing a ma'soom. These are the types of people that have made life difficult for the rest of us. You know, when you tell a non-Muslim that Islam is a peaceful religion, Islam is so peaceful. They say, look at this video, how peaceful it is. They're beheading people in the name of Islam, chanting Allahu Akbar. These are the types of people that have damaged the image of Islam. These are the types of people that have pushed people away from Islam. It began back then. You know, just to give you an idea of the type of violence. You know, not only were they radical, anyone who did not practice Islam the way that they did, they consider them kafir. And to them, a kafir doesn't deserve to be alive. One of the companions of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, Khabbab ibn al-Arat, he had a son by the name of Abdullah. He was traveling through Nahrawan, where 4,000 of these Khawarij were based. And he was traveling with his wife, who was pregnant, full term. So they see him passing by, and they could tell that he's not one of them. He doesn't fit, you know, their standard for religiosity. So they start to harass him. And they start to like rip his clothes and taunt him and abuse him. And then they ask him, the Khawarij, they ask him, who are you? What are you doing here? He says that I'm the son of one of the Sahaba of the Prophet. My father is Khabbab, one of the well-known Sahaba. They say, tell us a hadith from the Prophet that you heard from your father. He says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi says that there will come a time when it will be difficult to distinguish truth from falsehood. People will begin the day as mu'mineen, and by the time sun sets, they'll be kuffar. They won't be able to hold on to their iman. It will be a time of confusion. People can't determine what's haqq, what's batil. Then they ask him, what's your opinion of Ali ibn Abi Talib? What do you think about him? He says that he is the most pious. He's the closest one to the Prophet. They say, okay, now we're going to finish you. He's kafir. What do you mean he's the most pious? He's an infidel. He's an apostate. Did you see what he did in the Battle of Siffin? They say that we're going to kill you in a way that we've never killed anyone. You know, when you see these videos of the followers of Ahlul Bayt being butchered and massacred in Iraq and other places, you think this is a new phenomenon? You know how many people died because they expressed love for Amir al-Mu'mineen? So they take him and his wife and they tie them to a tree. As they're tying them to a tree, there's a Christian farmer that has a pig. So they go, one of the Khawarij, they go and they behead the pig. Some of the Khawarij, they protested. They say, why did you behead this pig? This is haram. The pig didn't belong to you, right? You know, as if it belongs to you, it's okay to behead him if it belongs. The issue is it didn't belong to you. They say this doesn't belong to you, this is haram. You have to go back to the Christian man and give him payment for the value of the pig. So Abdullah ibn Khabbab, he's with his wife, they're tied to the tree. They said, alhamdulillah, maybe they have a little bit of fear of Allah. You know, they wanted to give payment for the pig that they killed. Maybe they'll show us mercy. But to these people, you're worse than this animal. They take him to the river and they slaughter him by the river. And his wife, they take her, they knew that she was pregnant. They kill her, they cut her open, they take out the fetus and they kill the fetus. You know, as I said, when you read these incidents, these barbaric incidents in history, you don't believe it. It's shocking. How could, these are human beings? SubhanAllah, go look at videos in Syria and other places. This happens. There are people like this in the world. It's a scary reality. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam told them that, listen, you know, these Khawarij, before they started to commit acts of violence, the Imam told them, listen, you want to call me a kafir, murtad, you don't want to pay allegiance, you're free to believe whatever you want. But the moment you commit acts of violence against other Muslims, against other people, this is when I have to intervene. The Khawarij, my dear brothers and sisters, they would come on Fridays. They would go to Kufa on Friday. They would enter the masjid when Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen is giving a khutbah. They would interrupt his sermon. Can you imagine now? Imagine I'm speaking now and someone comes and just starts shouting and creating a disturbance. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen is the Khalifa. He doesn't even arrest them. They come and they interrupt his khutbah. his sermon, and they start reciting verses of the Holy Quran about kuffar, intending that this is about Ali ibn Abi Talib. The Imam alayhi salam, out of respect for the Holy Quran, he has so much reverence for the Quran that when they're shouting verses of the Quran at him, he pauses and he just lets them recite. He has the power to arrest them, to imprison them, but he leaves them. He lets them shout verses of the Quran and chant until they become tired. And then he continues his khutbah. See the tolerance of the Imam. How much patience he had. He says, I'm not going to impose anything on you. You're free to believe whatever you want. You know, there are some governments around the world where if anyone even questions the leader, he's imprisoned. They're doing it in front of the Imam in the masjid, calling him an infidel, a heretic, disrupting Friday prayer. The Imam alayhi salam, he leaves them. And he doesn't even cut their stipend from Baytul Mal. You know, you would think the Imam would say, that's it, you don't get any more assistance from the government, you're on your own. The Imam says, no, they have family, they have children. I'm not going to cut their monthly stipend. As long as you do not commit acts of violence against anyone, you're free to believe whatever you want. This was Amir al-Mu'mineen. You know, brothers and sisters, when you read in Nahj al-Balagha, the Imam alayhi salam, he says, Wallahi law u'atitu al-aqalim as-sab'a bima tahta aflakiha. If I was given the entire universe, the 7 firmaments, everything in the universe, all the treasures of the universe, ala an a'si Allah fi namlatin aslubuha julbu sha'iratin ma fa'alt. If you were to offer me the entire universe, not just money, everything, the kingdom of the heavens and the earth, to just take away the seed, the skin of the grain that is in the mouth of an ant, I wouldn't do it. Why? Because it's dhulm. I cannot take something that belongs to even a tiny creature. This is the type of justice we need in the world today. This is why Ali ibn Abi Talib is always going to be relevant. He lived 14 centuries ago. But how many people have this sense of justice, this sense of fairness, this compassion? The Imam fought 3 battles. He never mutilated a single body. He buried the dead. He did not allow his soldiers to confiscate the property of the army that he defeated, because at the end of the day, they're still Muslims. They're still Muslims. In the Battle of Siffin, when Muawiyah controlled access to the river, to the water, he did not allow Ali ibn Abi Talib and his troops to have access to water. He didn't give them water. When the Imam alayhi salam gained control of the water, some of the Imam's soldiers say, now it's payback. Just like they denied us water, now we can deny them water. The Imam says, no. That's the difference between me and Muawiyah. That every creature, everyone is entitled to drink water. This is the difference between Ali ibn Abi Talib and Muawiyah. And that's why, going back to the point that I made earlier, there has to be a difference between us and other people. I'm against this whole argument that, you know, we're just like everybody else. You know, accept us in the West because we're just like everybody else. We're messed up, just like the rest of us. Just like the rest of you. We have Ahlul Bayt. There's no reason why we should be messed up. There's no reason why we should be the same. You have Amir al-Mu'mineen, you have Rasulullah, you have Fatima al-Zahra, and you're like everybody else? This is an insult to the family of the Prophet, to say we're just like everybody else when you have Sahifa Sajjadiyah, when you have Dua Kumail, when you have these types of figures, these types of role models. So that's something that we have to bear in mind. I think I'll conclude here. If there are any questions before we break for lunch or dinner, whatever you want to call it. Any questions or comments? It doesn't necessarily have to be related. I mean, preferably, I'd prefer if it's related to the discussion, but if you have a pressing question about any topic, please feel free. Could be even a comment. Yeah. The most reliable source, Wikipedia. No, it's mentioned in the books of, the sources that I use are Arabic sources. So I really don't read English books, if you want my recommendation for a good Islamic history book, beginning with the life of the Prophet and even the Khilafah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, there's a book called A Restatement of the History of Islam and Muslims. The author's name, do you know what the author's name is? Sayyid, I don't remember what the author's name is, but it's available online, so you don't even need to purchase the book. It's written by a Shia scholar, but the sources that he uses are many of them are Sunni references. So he does a pretty good job at maintaining, being objective. So that's a book that it's a pretty thick book. I know people don't like to read that much these days, but if there's not a YouTube video about it, people are not interested. But I would recommend reading that. I think it's a very good introduction to the history of Islam, especially the early history of Islam. Because people ask me, can we study Nahj al-Balagha? Can I, what do you? The problem with Nahj al-Balagha is that you have to understand Islamic history to appreciate Nahj al-Balagha. Because if you don't know, who Muawiyah is, if you don't know about the Khawarij, if you don't know, certain personalities, you have to understand that there is a historical context to the letters and the sermons that are delivered by the Imam. So I think that this book, A Restatement of the History of Islam and Muslims is a good, starting point. So then you can kind of, when you go to Nahj al-Balagha, okay, I know who the Imam is talking to, I know the circumstances. The book that I mentioned. So it's from Zaman al-Jahiliyyah to the death of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Yeah, so basically Zaman al-Jahiliyyah to the year 40 after the Hijrah. So it goes through the first Khalifa, second Khalifa, third, the government of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So it's a pretty good book on the early history of Islam. Yeah, al-Islam.org has it. Sayyid Ali Asghar Radhawi, yes. I would recommend actually buying the book, because I don't know about you, it's good to write notes, in the margins. And plus it's better for your eyes. I see everybody's wearing glasses. Yes. Yes. Definitely that's also a consideration. I think, from a logistical standpoint, because Kufa is a lot more central than Medina. And when you're the Khalifa, you need to have access to different parts of the Islamic empire. So Kufa was definitely a more strategic place for the Imam. And it was also a military zone. And because the Imam knew that, it's going to be a very tumultuous period, people are not gonna, there's gonna be military conflict, and I think because the Imam anticipated that, he wanted to be closer to his army, so in the event of conflict, he can rally his troops. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So Ammar ibn Yasir was killed in the Battle of Siffin. And everyone was familiar with the hadith of the Prophet where Rasulullah says, تَقْتُلُهُ الْفِئَةُ الْبَاغِيَةُ, that the rebellious group will kill Ammar. So the moment Ammar ibn Yasir falls in the battle of Siffin, everyone is kind of, pauses that, is this the fulfillment of the prophetic prophecy? But then again, you have the master politician, Amr ibn al-As, who says that no. It was Ali ibn Abi Talib who killed Ammar ibn Yasir because he brought him to battle. To which, the answer to that by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt is that then based on that logic, Rasulullah killed Hamza in the battle of Uhud because he took him with him to the battle of Uhud. But it really goes to show you how naive people are. If you look at what Muawiyah was able to do in Sham, so Muawiyah, he joined Islam in the 11th hour, surrendered to Islam. But in Sham, he was able to convince everybody that I'm this great companion of the Prophet, I'm one of the scribes of revelation, and people believed it. People are naive. People don't verify information. And many of us are like the people of Sham. We believe everything that we hear. The people of Sham believed everything that they heard. They didn't authenticate. So we shouldn't be naive. Sometimes, oh, this is a mujtahid, and you believe it. How do you know? Did you do your research? Oh, I follow this marja'. Why? Because someone told me that he's the most knowledgeable. You can't be naive. Otherwise, what's the difference between you? Maybe if you were living during that time, you would have been on the wrong side because you're so naive. So you have to, when you're presented with information, you have to do your homework. You have to do your research. Yes, sister. Yeah. No, again, this was a political ploy because the reality is Uthman was killed by an angry mob. It's really difficult to point out who was the killer of Uthman. Secondly, as I mentioned, these individuals were very vocal in their opposition to Uthman. Why how come all of a sudden they're acting like they're his attorneys? They knew that the Imam alayhi salam would not be able to produce or bring forward the killers because it was just total chaos. It was total chaos. And because they knew that the Imam would not be able to bring forward the killers, and some historians believe that, Talha was a participant in the killing. So because they knew that the Imam would not be able to bring the killers forward, because if the Imam really wants to go after them, he's going to have to arrest them as well, because they're the ones who provoked the assassination, provoked the murderers. So this was a way of discrediting Ali ibn Abi Talib. They wanted to delegitimize his government. They wanted to, buy time to rally support against the Imam. So there was really no intention to find the killers of Uthman, because again, he was killed by an angry mob. It's not like it was one individual and everybody knew and they were trying to just find out who this individual was. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of things. So I had mentioned that one of the dilemmas that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam faced when he came and wanted to establish his government was the lack of qualified people. Right? There are a lot of religious people, but you're talking about a very unique skill set to be a governor of a region, right? To maintain, order, to be able to, keep things under control, to be a moral person who looks after the rights of people, who's not going to be influenced by others. So a couple of things that I would recommend is, at our local mosques, I think that, in the same way that when you apply for a job, you have to have certain qualifications. If you want to be the board member at a mosque, you should maybe take a quick course on how to run a non-profit organization. If you want to raise money for the community, maybe take a quick course on funding. At least get a certification on how to fundraise. So I think that the problem with a lot of the centers that I've been to is that most masajid, if you look at the board members, it's like default. Whoever's the doctor in the community has to be the president of the community. As if being a doctor makes you qualified to run a non-profit organization. What does that have to do with anything? So I think that we have to set a certain criterion that has to be followed. That if you want, a position in the community, if you want a leadership position in the community, you have to be trained. You have to have certain certifications. You have to know how to run a non-profit organization. You should take, a course on leadership. So I think this will resolve a lot of problems, because when you have unqualified, and a lot of them are sincere, not to take anything away from them. Many of these individuals are sincere, they're doing their best, but if we want to move forward, we need qualified people. So we need people who are going to invest in organizational skills, take, a quick course on management, a leadership course, so you can take your community to the next level. There has to be, some quality control. Not everybody who comes to the masjid, and just because he comes every Jum'ah, yes, you're the president of the organization now, and it takes a lot of skill to run an organization. How do you deal with conflict? Take a course on conflict resolution. There's a lot of conflicts in our communities, and it's a small conflict, and then it becomes the greatest fitna of the decade. Why? Because you have people that are not skilled in conflict resolution. So these are just some of the things that I think we can do. And just on an individual level, I think Muslims need to be more well-rounded. There's a saying that goes, know everything about something, specialize in something, but know something about everything. Read. I always tell youth, especially during the summertime, they're playing video games for 17 hours a day. My God, read. Pick up a newspaper, read an article, understand what's happening in the world. This is the year 2018, You're not living in the jungles of the Amazon. You should be aware of what's going on in the world. So I think that we need people who are cultured, who have an understanding of how the world works, who don't only read religious texts. It's important to get an Islamic education, but, you also have to know, something about everything. Be a well-rounded person. And I think that's what was lacking during the time of the Imams. And, that's what the Imam, when the 12th Imam establishes his government, is he also going to have the same problem as Ali ibn Abi Talib? Okay, you pray 5 times a day, but can I put you in charge of an entire community? Do you have the skill set? Do you understand human psychology? How to resolve conflicts? How to empower people? You know the definition of a leader. A true leader, and this is my favorite definition of what a true leader is. A true leader is able to make ordinary people do extraordinary things. This is a true leader. To be able to empower others, to cultivate their skills. So this requires training. And unfortunately, 99% of the centers that I've been to, the people who run the centers are not qualified. And that's why the youth have to rise to the occasion. Youth are very good at pointing out the problems. Well, be a part of the solution too. You can't just blame the elders. The elders, did quite a bit. They established the centers. We can't always blame them. Oh, there's a generation gap. The elders, they do. So you come forward and say that I want to be on the board. What does it take? So you have to be proactive. It's easy to point the finger. Anyone can point the finger. Food is here? Okay. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.